So today our topic is individualism versus collectivism because this mindset affects relationship. And we've been doing a series on reigniting the spark in relationships. And there are so many different nuances to relationships. And one of the topics we're going to dive in today is an individualistic mindset and a collectivist mindset. How do we bridge that gap so that we can all be on the same page and be connected?
That's right, Pam, my best-selling author in America. And I think that we can actually share from our lives and offer some practical tips, insights to help navigate these two mindsets. Because I do believe we are living in a society where you find people with different mindsets. Some come from individualistic mindset, and then the others have collectivism. The more multicultural the place you live in, the more you will encounter these things. So I'm glad that we could talk about this.
Yes, so true. And just to give an audience a perspective of where we're from, I grew up in Chicago and then I moved to India to do a lot of ministry work, and that's where I met my co-host Rita. And currently Rita lives in Toronto, Canada, which is multicultural. And so we both have personal experiences that we want to share that helped us. We were able to look deeper and connect why things are happening. So, Rita, I have a story on just growing up when my first experience with this different mindset. I remember going home. My cousins lived in India, and my parents took me there for vacation. And I told my cousin, "Let's go shopping." And in my mind, shopping meant she and I think I was like in my teens. So we would just go on our own. We would browse at windows. We would window shop and just the two of us can hang to build relationship. So I went to pick her up and I saw my grandma ready, my aunt was ready, my uncle, the whole family was ready to come shopping with me. And I was like, oh, this is a collectivist event. My cousin doesn't go by herself shopping. And so that was my first time like, huh, what's happening? You can relate.
That's so funny. Exactly. Speaking of differences, I have something that I remember from my life, and I've got into a relationship and we wanted to get married. So in India, engagements happen. And then, of course, after that is marriage. There's no such thing as dating back in those days, at least. And so my husband and I, he just surprised me with the wedding ring and everything and had this private engagement. Well, I think he had asked my parents. Hopefully he did. Anyway, we go home and then I'm all engaged. And my parents are so shocked. We have my uncle and aunt, everyone living in our house, and they're like, take away the ring. So I had to take out the ring, and he had to put the ring in front of them, in front of every pray, and together everyone blessed us. And so now that I look back, and I think that's because in India, we don't have things like individual engagements, or at least back in those days. We honor the collective, the families coming together. Everything is done as a family together.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I look back, albeit it was insensitive at that moment, but now it sounds so funny.
Yes, yes. I'm just so grateful for our family showing us so much grace. So let us break it down for our audience. What is individualistic and what is collectivist? So, an individualistic mindset emphasizes personal goals, autonomy, individual rights. Think about cultures in the US, much of Western Europe. Success and personal achievements are independent choices.
That's right. And it may sound like you're self-centered, but that is what it's all about, individualism, right? But whereas collectivist mindset is the opposite of that. So it's interdependence. It's all about harmony with one another. And you may find this culture in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Jewish. So the focus is so much on community, family, and shared success. So this can have impact on who we are, how we communicate, since we're talking about relationships and marriage and things like that. Individualistic culture value very direct, assertive communication. You say what you think and you're very direct. Whereas in the collectivist culture, It's about reading between the lines. It's persevering in relationships. It's avoiding conflict, and you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And you assume that it's almost like mind reading. You assume. And so that is how culture is back in those places, I believe.
That's right. And it's not just so much, it's a mindset. So individualism, collectivism, I think about it as a spectrum, especially if you have multicultural experiences. So Rita, I've known you for over 30 years, and there are some areas where we tend to lean more towards the individualistic style, and maybe our husbands lean towards a collectivist style. Can you think of any examples in your marriage, since we're having a relationship series, that you'd like to share with our audience?
Absolutely. I think after moving here and being here for more than a decade, I believe I've cultivated an individualistic mindset in the way I communicate mostly. And so sometimes I find it a conflict, right, in our relationship because my husband, he's more of a collectivist thinker. And so when I talk, I will be very direct. I'll be very assertive. I have no problem saying no and asking for what I want. Whereas I find that we get into arguments because that's not how he communicates, right? He assumes that I already know what he knows, or I know what he's going to do.
Uh,
So, or it's like he may not necessarily want to talk to me about it because he knows, oh, he'll get into an argument. So let's not even talk about it. Let me just quietly
yeah,
do it. And so that I find is a very collectivist way of thinking, that
yeah,
assumption, the maintaining peace and not wanting to confront and
yeah.
sort things out. So I find that is a
Yeah.
challenge in our relationship
For
sometimes.
sharing that. And I am honored and privileged to be able to sit in the midst of both of you talking and experiencing what you are sharing. So I always think about how you both bridge the gap, and we'll give the same tools to our audience. How do you bridge the gap when you have in communication, when one party looks at the problem through an individualistic lens and the other party looks at it through a collectivist lens? So it's important for us to lean into the strengths of both. And I remember growing up in the United States, the first time I asked my dad, I think I was 13, I said, Dad, I want to have a boyfriend. And that was like, I remember him feeling a sense of shock, like, is she asking? Because in the collectivist culture, especially in Indian families, girl doesn't go and choose a husband.
Mhm.
It's a collectivist decision. And here I'm at 13 asking him, can I have a boyfriend? But I really am grateful for my dad because he said, growing up in the United States, you have to learn to pick the strengths of both cultures. You actually have a gift. You get to experience the whole world. So pick the strengths of both. So I'm going to define the strengths of the individualistics and then the strengths of the collectivist. So an individualistic strength, the strength is they're clear, they are direct, there's personal accountability, and things are very efficient, very organized. They want to identify and solve problems. The collectivist strengths is they value harmony, they value relationship building, collaboration, a shared sense of responsibility. And so when we have these arguments in relationships, when you find yourself not feeling heard or not feeling understood, make a choice to lean in. Maybe that person is coming from a collectivist mindset or an individualistic mindset. How can I find that strength? And if both parties value strengths, there's going to be a bridge that we can bridge. And I think that would be super valuable.
Yeah, I agree, Pam. I think open communication, that is a place and time, and then you're able to be honest and open about what you believe, what
Yeah.
you value, and what your expectations are. And making a time for it, I think helps. That's something that I found because we're
Mhm.
always interacting with so many different kinds of people. We need to know about them, right? And also willing to compromise and be flexible. That's something that I've noticed just in my own relationship, that sometimes my expectations may not be, it's what I think. And so I
Mm.
should be willing to negotiate. I should be willing to find that middle ground on
Yeah.
issues like expectations, traditions, whatever that may be. I think that's something that has been helpful. Outside support, like you guys, have an argument, we sit down and we talk about it, and we're able to come to that middle ground, to find that gap. That helps. And I think, especially for people who have relationship struggles, I know that there could be a tendency to be very quiet about it and not talk about it and just quietly suffer. Or there's a solution. You can have somebody, you can seek support.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a better way of dealing with things, because an outside perspective always helps, right?
Yeah.
So, and then of course, setting boundaries in your life, how where do you stop and where do they start? And I think that incorporates both the teamwork as well as an individualistic perspective.
Yes.
I think finding that balance is so, so important. And I find that is important. That has worked for me in just navigating relationship struggles.
Yeah, that is so important. So I thought we can kind of to bow and conclude for today. We about reigniting the spark in our marriages, in our relationships. And one of the ways that we can do that is by understanding the mindset behind the conversation. When you feel like you're not understood or heard, perhaps the other person has a different mindset. And remember, individualism and collectivism is a spectrum, and these challenges can show up not just in marriages. It could be even with families and kids. Especially in my life, it showed up in my relationship with my parents, growing up in an individualistic culture with collectivist first generation parents. So I encourage our audience to take a challenge. The challenge I want to leave everyone with is to honor both mindset in one interaction. Start that conversation about cultural norms. And we've just kind of tip of the iceberg in just one area where cultural differences show up. And there's a lot more out there. And so we would encourage you to learn more, be curious, and get comfortable in conflicts so that we can grow, because God has put different people in our lives so we can grow and become more and more like Him.
Absolutely. And I think we are in a time where we're trying to connect with the younger generation, not with our parents, or with each other, but with the future generation. And I think it is of utmost importance that we learn to have the skill where we understand where people come from and, have faced in life and where they are at right now. And it is a possibility, as we always say in our podcasts, that it's a possibility. Things can work, but we can make it work. And so I want to thank you, the viewers, for following us and through your messages. And I want to ask you to continue supporting us and share with your friends this snippet that we learned. We'll come back next time with more stuff on relationships and leadership. So thank you so much for listening. And yes, do go and check out Pam's podcast.
Well, I've just published a book, Sparkle, 7-Step Guide to a Joy-Infused Life. And if anyone's interested, it is on Amazon right now. And I've got tons of cultural stories in the book of my personal experiences and how we're able to come up. And my biggest tip is be curious. Don't get caught up with the crazy cycle of conflicts. Be curious, take a pause, and reflect on what mindset is that other person coming in. Thank you so much for musing with me, Rita. As always, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye now.